Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We're happy to have you here today. We're also very happy to have David Harrison here. We're going to talk politics in just a minute, but I would like to start by thanking Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for sponsoring this program. Something to Talk About airs several times a week. You can check it out and see what's coming up by going to biseniorcenter.org/calendar. Fieldstone offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care up on Rolling Bay. They have day stay and respite programs, and you can ask Randy or Jamie. They'll be happy to show you around, treat you to lunch or dinner, and be happy to talk to you about what they have to offer up there. The number 206-594-1010. Also, we'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on these waters since time immemorial. We honor them and we are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters. David Harrison is a senior lecturer emeritus with the University of Washington Evans School. He has a long history of political analysis and political work, and he brings that experience to us usually once a month. And we are very grateful for being able to have you frame this crazy world for us, Mr. Harrison. So welcome.
Thank you, Reed. I want to greet Fran Corton. I haven't seen her on the screen very much. And when Fran talks to herself about these things, she's having an advanced political discussion. So I'm delighted to have her join us. The usual three topics today. Usually there are three topics. Today they're the big, beautiful bill, and then a digression to Trump versus Elon Musk and its broader politics and implications. And finally, the courts, don't forget them, because we'll be hearing some more about them this summer. So as you know, we're doing this with each other, and then we get quite a few hits over the month. So even though we're a somewhat smaller group today, we'll maintain our usual decorum to the advantage of the many. I think the Senate on the big, beautiful bill will ultimately retreat to what John Thune wanted all along, was two bills that contradict each other less obviously than the one bill.
Harrison?
Oh, yeah. The one bill. Fran, you need to mute yourself there.
Yeah, I will take care of that.
Okay. So the one bill, right now, there are so many internal contradictions in the one bill that it's getting, well, it's always been bizarre with the House and the Senate holding very thin Republican majorities. But in this case, the House passed that bill by deciding they both did and didn't significantly cut Medicaid. They got a whole bunch of votes at the end by promising they were cutting Medicaid even more, and they kept a whole bunch of allegedly moderate votes by saying they weren't. So that was a neat trick. So now, at least before the Musk blow up, the idea, a la Joni Ernst and others, was to say basically the people who are always intended to be on Medicaid will be on Medicaid, and this is basically waste, fraud, and abuse cut, or work requirement cut, and we don't need to worry about that. The problem is when the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office weighs in and they estimate 9 million or so people going off Medicaid, that's just really hard for them, impossible for them to sustain that argument, and they can't sustain that argument. So it's all about when not only are their majorities thin, and Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are holding the minority of all the minority votes with no possibility that anybody's going to cross over on the big, beautiful bill. Not only that, but there's there's dissension in the wings, and like I say, it's exacerbated by the Musk-Trump dust up. If you hear a commentator saying it's not germane to the big, beautiful bill battle, then turn them off because it is. I mean, it is true that Elon Musk never necessarily had his own political following, given that people may be crazy, but are they that crazy? Well, perhaps. But it's the problem is that Musk reinforces some narratives that were already troubling for Trump. So I'll explain. But first, we should think about retribution. So you would think that retribution, that senators and House members would have even more power to jockey with very small margins. Think Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin got a lot of stuff out of reconciliation that Joe Biden didn't want to give him and Schumer didn't want to give him, and he got it because they needed his vote. So you think that that would be an automatic thing, but remember that Joe Biden was never going to kill Joe Manchin physically on the steps of the White House. So Trump's level of retribution is perhaps the highest in American political history, or pretty close. So witness Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, when he had to decide to whether or not to vote for Robert Kennedy. He decided that Robert Kennedy was an advocate for vaccines after all. Who knew? Cassidy, as a doc, had spent his whole life advocating for vaccines. And in one moment, he forgot everything he ever believed or learned, because otherwise Trump would have primaried him in Louisiana and he might have lost his seat. So it is true that Trump is capable of huge levels of retribution. This is more complex in the Senate than in the House, as you know. There's nothing like having a 6-year term that makes you a little bit more independent than having a 2-year term. Plus, some of these senators are not vulnerable to Trump saying he's going to run a primary opponent against them. 3 in particular, Mike Lee of Utah, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, and Rand Paul of Kentucky don't care that he says that. In fact, if anything, with Mike Lee, it probably builds his brand. Certainly, Ron Johnson, he was elected in the first place as a Tea Party guy, and he is not paying lip service the national debt. It's his big issue. So the problem with that particular wing, who maybe believes that the Congressional Budget Office estimate of a $2.5 trillion budget deficit in national debt increase might be accurate. Those 3 senators are not necessarily easy for Trump to push around. Now, there are some people that are a little different. Tom Tillis of North Carolina is very vulnerable, and he's looking for a spot where he can make the bill better and still vote for it. And his spot, surprisingly, is energy tax credits. He doesn't want them all wiped out. Similarly, Susan Collins, who some of us thought was in trouble 6 years ago, is in deep trouble now. Her numbers are way down, and Maine is not a great support state for Donald Trump. And Susan Collins, too, is looking to give him a final vote, because he'll kill her otherwise, while still getting something out of the bill. In her case, a little bit softer touch on Medicaid and a little bit more attention to rural hospitals. So it's different than Trump pushing around a poor House member. In the Senate, there's a little bit more protection for at least some senators. So let's think for a second with the big bill, beautiful bill, and I'll stop pretty soon for questions. Let's think for a minute about where the points of contention are with the bill that squeaked through and was always going to squeak through the House. because of retribution. I mean, it's just, if you want to kill your career and you're a House, there is still a caucus called the Problem Solvers Caucus. And those are the kind of Republicans who would talk to Derek Kilmer on a regular basis. And there's like 15 of them. Notice how many of them are fighting in the open to protect the least of our brethren. Zero. And because they could be so easily primaried, and if they'll lose in the primary, even if their opponent loses in the general direction, it might be worth it for Trump just to drop him out. Let's think about the factions in the Senate. Amazingly, the editorial writer in the New York Times on having a moral set of Medicaid cuts is Josh Hawley from Missouri. Josh Hawley is a true blue conservative, really a MAGA conservative, except somebody's got to think about running for president. And a smart move for Hawley. He can have great conservative credentials and be allegedly a conservative with a heart. So he's in a clique that wants Medicaid cuts to be more careful with Murkowski and Susan Collins, and also surprisingly, Jim Justice, the senator from West Virginia, who's one more senator that's worried about Medicaid cuts impact on rural hospitals, meaning it can close rural hospitals, not the impact meaning let's do with one fewer doc. It will close rural hospitals. So there's that clique. There's the clique that doesn't want to explode the debt. Now, as you know, if you don't want to explode the debt, you could not do the tax. You could not enrich the rich quite as much, comfort the comfortable quite as much, or you could give up on Trump's tip promise. Remember, as Tom Tillis says, the tips, the not having to report tips on your taxes is a benefit for a waiter or wait person making $50,000 a year, and not a benefit for some other North Carolinian who is also making $50,000 a year. So there's some heartburn over that. There is also a little bit of clique, including Tillis, over the energy. They were kind of liking, they have entrepreneurs in North Carolina who are trying to invent clean energy technologies, and that hurts their feelings when those people go bankrupt. So the problem is, as you already know, is it's pretty hard to meet the arguments and needs of one of those small groups that is holding the balance on the bill in their hands without upsetting another of those small groups. That was true in the House too, with the state local sales tax group, state local tax group. So I'm going to close this. Can you hear the background flights? Do I need to close?
Oh, a little bit. It's not too bad. You're pretty clear.
So the problem is, if you help somebody like Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and Ron Johnson, you could lose votes off the other side. The issue there, of course, is even if you get Murkowski and Collins, you need someone else. And when they were doing confirmations, it was a scam. You could get 2 votes. I'm voting against him. I can't tolerate it because I know there's not a third vote. So that's why they confirmed all those folks. So they know that in advance. But on some of these issues, you could really have somebody join Collins and Murkowski just to get some leverage. That's their problem. In the House, they already dealt with conservatives by accelerating the work requirement on Medicaid. Don't buy into this crap that there are people sitting around their house avoiding $30 an hour jobs so they can collect Medicaid. It's mess of people who have childcare issues or work skills issues or job availability issues, and they might be able to propel 1 million or so of those folks in the direction of Medicaid, retained Medicaid eligibility through work, but don't buy into that as some massive change. At any rate, they already got acceleration in the House. So when Ron Johnson and folks say cut Medicaid more, I don't know how they're going to do it without unleashing the other side. They could toy around with Medicare. Be my guest. Boy, that would be a snake pit politically for them. Or it's Trump even signaled that they could raise taxes on the richest among us a little bit, but that didn't go anywhere. So I don't know what they're going to do. They're in trouble. So what else is happening before we comment on this? They also have to cleanse the House bill that came over of things that violate the Byrd rule. The Robert Byrd rule is what is germane if you only need 50 votes in a reconciliation bill, can only be things that assist in accomplishing the work of the overriding budget resolution. So what's going to go maybe is actually the ban on federal funding for Planned Parenthood. But what will go for sure is the limitation on artificial intelligence regulation by the states. So the parliamentarian will rule and the Senate will say, too bad, we can't do that, and they'll be fine with that, whatever they think about AI. Famously, in Biden's day, the Democrats tried to do immigration law changes and failed because of the parliamentarian real made it non-germane. And then, of course, there's one other possibility, and that is they'll take it with the bill so much then that they lose their House votes and they won't pass it. So the future of the big, beautiful bill, even without Musk's recent comments, which we're about to get into it, the future of it is problematic. You know, to me, either way, things are awful. I just like them to be awful in such a way that we could take back the House in a year and the presidency in 2 years. If I had my druthers and they passed a big, beautiful bill, I would like it to be a little bit less favorable for very wealthy people and a little less hurtful for the grand expansion of Medicaid that we got during Barack Obama, which was the single biggest legislative achievement of his time. So that's my thinking. So let's stop for a minute, get your thoughts, interests, insults, and concerns about the big, beautiful bill. What you think of that? Let's not be shy, young people. Fran, unmute yourself or somehow.
So in terms of the Byrd bill, another element, I believe, is this rule about how essentially the Trump administration doesn't have to obey the courts.
Yeah, that's right. I shouldn't have passed over that. So this is all called the Byrd bath, proving that at least one senator has at least a modest sense of humor. But yes, it's a rule that was limiting. I never totally understand it. Fran, maybe you could explain it further, but it was having to do with the power of district court judges to enjoin. Is that right?
Yeah, that they don't have to obey an injunction.
Yeah. So that is going to be, and when we get to the court part, we're going to talk about that in the context of birthright citizenship. But that, as Fran points out, is very, well, not just very likely, it's absolutely going to be removed by the parliamentarian. Although there's news today that Charles Grassley is fooling around with a Senate version that is less problematic, but I don't know how he gets past the Byrd rule on germaneness. So that's something to watch for, but Fran's right that I shouldn't have left that out.
Yeah, and my follow-up question is, you know, I take my various bloggers' advice and I call my senators. And I'm always wondering, what is it worth phoning about? And do you feel that the Byrd rule will hold, that the Senate will in fact abide by it?
So there was some news a month or so ago having to do with what the baseline was on permanent budget increases and present policy. And I think they're going to let Lindsey Graham decide that and pretend that they're not blowing as big of a hole in the budget as they really are, because they're trying to make impermanent tax cuts permanent. But outside of that, yes, I do not believe that there is any chance on the issues we've just discussed that the Senate will overrule the parliamentarian. One, she's the same parliamentarian that told Biden he couldn't do immigration. Two,
Yes.
she gives cover for senators that don't want to do those things anyway. They can just say, the parliamentarian made me do it. There wouldn't be any more than 40 votes to overrule the parliamentarian. So that's the good news.
Thank
Other
you.
questions, thoughts, concerns? In terms of what counts with a senator, in high volume situations, as you know, I worked for a little while for Maria Cantwell. You can't help if you're getting 5,000 calls, but do a count. You're going to. I mean, and I think it's worth it for that alone. But it's valuable as a part of the 100 other things that we're all trying to do. I wanted to mention one other thing before we go on to Elon Musk and his romance. For a long time on this page, in this Zoom, we've talked about why the House and Senate don't make Trump follow the Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974. So this is a process that we had with Nixon, where the president can't rescind already appropriated money. So all through the president's presidency, with Trump, cuts this, does this, freezes this. And then famously, the Supreme Court including Amy Coney Barrett, made Trump pay some USAID contractors. And to this day, there's 10 or so federal district court rulings on appropriations. So finally, they knew all along, Russell Vought, who's OMB head, knew about Trump's rescission experience in his previous presidency under the Budget and Impoundment Act, which means he sent it up, the cuts of existing appropriations. That's what rescission is about. Things that have already been appropriated that you're supposed to spend because that's the Constitution. And he put that package up and it didn't pass. So it didn't have a good experience. So now they put up $9 billion of cuts to NPR and PBS and foreign aid. And Mike Johnson thinks he has the votes, but they don't have 50 votes for that for two reasons in the Senate. One is there are some tribes that depend upon on public broadcasting for their communication. I guess they could do some kind of, I don't know how they would deal with that. And PEPFAR, which is the international initiative to fight AIDS, is loved by some Republicans. And so what will happen if there is a successful rescission? They would have to do it by July, and it would cut back that $9 billion to an amount that saves the aid funding. But it's interesting because we've been arguing that they should have to get the rescission, and this is them doing it. Other questions on the big beautiful bill before we move on? So Trump and Musk is a wonderful thing. Two unlovable people not loving each other anymore. So sad. Let's stop and pause at the magnitude of it. there was a commentator on CBS this morning saying that eventually we'll be getting back together, and that there have been other people that Trump hates that they've reconciled with. There's no reconciliation with, there is with Rubio, his Secretary of State, but Ron DeSantis doesn't love Donald Trump, and Nikki Haley hates him. The narrative that all of a sudden the richest man in the world is going to say, Don, even though you've questioned my immigration status and you're selling your Tesla and you're threatening to take away $5 billion in government contracts illegally, by the way, I still ultimately love you like a brother. It's not going to happen. Elon Musk doesn't need to do that. So the reason why, if we're not Trump fans, we should like this is that it abets Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, and Mike Lee's narrative in the Senate that the big beautiful bill shouldn't pass. We should like that, even though they would like further cuts. It exposes Trump's illegal behavior. When you say, maybe now that I don't like you, I should take your NASA contracts away. You know, even the New York Times said that with a straight face. Should somebody say it's that for a president to remove a government signed government contract over a political difference would be unethical, illegal? It makes the big, beautiful bill false narrative visible in an all new way. It decreases the political benefit, if any, that they have of the alleged Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE, and monumentally, it decreases future political funding for Republican congressional candidates. $200 million he put into that campaign. That wasn't just for Trump. It paid for, we had a huge door-to-door effort, and Musk paid, for the most part, for the Republican door-to-door effort to have the on-the-ground effort be paid for and then go away. Is worrisome for the closer to the center Republican candidates who are in swing districts, and we're depending on some more support from Elon. So that's the rub for them. So I'll stop there. Questions, thoughts, concerns? Tom Kilbane, you got to eventually say what you're thinking. He's not going to. An outspoken man, usually. Any questions, thoughts? Karen? You guys, is it a summer afternoon?
I guess so. I of course can ask a little bit about when you look at what's going on, it seems to me like it should maybe inspire, to me, some folks to throw some shade on Trump with sort of the backing of Musk. They can say, this guy is really not what he says he is. Would it empower some of those people who might otherwise be afraid of being primaried?
Well, it wouldn't be something that you would do if you were a congressman, because it'd still be too risky. But this Epstein thing is no small thing. If Trump had a provable Epstein connection, even with Democrats pulling defeat out of the jaws of victory, he wouldn't have won. Even with us deciding to run a cognitively impaired 81-year-old man, he wouldn't have necessarily won, since we eventually changed to Kamala. So I think the Epstein thing is serious. It just seems to me that if he was culpable or attachable to the Epstein claim, that somebody would have figured out how to do that by now. I think the reason why Trump's holds on to his 40% of Americans who love him is his whole thing is excusing anything that he's criticized for, from from the beginning as a false narrative. So you think some of these things would stick better, but part of his narrative is that we're going to say those things, a la Trump derangement syndrome. So that's why that happens. But yeah, I think shade will follow. I said in my blog a couple months ago that it's easier to push Trump down the hill than it was 2 months before that. And I think he's further down the hill. I think he's giving back the House. It's just, how are we going to do for the 18 months till that happens? And how to make sure the reason why those are going to be enforceable elections is in almost all those swing states, the Secretary of State who runs elections is a Democrat. Other questions?
Tom has unmuted himself.
I found the button. Musk, with all the money Musk gave to candidates, he must have given quite a bit to congressional candidates as well as Senate candidates. But wouldn't he control, because of the amount that he's given them, wouldn't he control some of those candidates? And should not that insulate him a little bit against?
No, I don't. I have difference with a lot of my friends on money and politics. So there's so much money in these campaigns. I don't think control is the right word. I do think money is the mother's milk of politics. And I think members of Congress do know who gives them a lot. And non-incidentally, that's why I was very sad that Emily Randall took all that money from the cyber currency lobby. I think it was wrong. But I do think certainly candidates will remember that they got a lot of money from Elon, but they got a lot of money from Trump-loving PACs too. So I don't think control is the right word.
And Fran has her hand up.
Yeah, so today I read that Steve Bannon has called for nationalizing essentially our space program, Starlink and the rocket program that Elon runs. So I guess my question is, do you have any view on the possibility of nationalizing the space program, which is in the hands of a private individual?
I don't think the president has power to do that, but Musk has already walked back what he said, which was, if you say you're going to take away my money, I'll shut it down. And of course, if you're ferrying astronauts around and you're the only one that seems to be able to do it, given that Boeing keeps on not doing it, that's a pretty serious thing to say. But it's strange that we're having a policy discussion about what somebody said on X, but he said on X that he's kind of relented. But no, I don't think that the courts, I don't think there's an emergency power that would allow the nationalization of the space program, period. I can research it some more, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? On to the courts. We got
on to the courts, the land of emergency issues.
Yeah. So, the courts are less transactional than Trump by a lot. Obviously, the Supreme Court during the campaign did extraordinary leaps to invent a doctrine of presidential, limited but pretty expanded presidential criminal immunity, way beyond what constitutional scholars thought they could invent. But some things have happened since then. So before we talk about those things, why does Trump flood the zone? So as they've been talking about whether a district judge can enjoin the federal activity nationally, the argument before the courts by Trump's attorney was, this has skyrocketed. There's 40 cases where federal district court judges have enjoined us nationally. Well, there's 40 cases where they've done blatantly unconstitutional things. There's a reason why there were fewer with Bush and then Biden, where they were doing fewer things that federal district court justice would enjoy. Nonetheless, as you know, the Supreme Court is worried about this, and they're going to do something. So let's talk about what they're going to do. First, let's say, well, why does Trump flood the zone? Why does he do things when he knows they're going to be take not just national injunctions? There's plenty more cases where a judge will enjoin the administration on behalf of an individual person who's about a group of people about to be deported or somebody who's been fired. So those cases where with individual plaintiffs, you don't have to enjoin the government to do anything but treat that plaintiff differently. So that he'll flood the zone with those too. It's partly because he has a theory that the more unconstitutional things he does, the more he'll get away with. Some of them, he's got in his head a percentage. If you increase the gross number, you'll increase the net. I also think in some weird way, in some cases, the disruption is good enough. So he doesn't expect to win. He expects to get MAGA to love him and get on TV and make what's left of Murdoch's brain to love him too. So now comes something even less understandable. He's trying to kill the Federalist Society, who sent him all these judges, his appointees in his first term. This is really weird because who are the Trump judges that exist? They're people who were recommended by the Federalist Society, which he's trying to strafe. So I don't know why he's doing that, because for the most part, the only judges that are there's a lot of Trump judges that are joining Trump, so they're not safe either, but I don't get why it's to his advantage to criticize him. The big criticism, of course, is saved for Amy Coney Barrett and to some extent to Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Everybody but Alito and Thomas. So that's not going to change. Amy Coney Barrett is not going to be David Souter. She agrees with Clarence Thomas on 80% of his votes. Unfortunately for Trump, she doesn't agree with regard to due process for undocumented people. And she's going to continue to be the fifth vote, saying that there's simple due process, advance notice of the charges against you, a chance to respond, evidentiary review by an unbiased party. So she's going to continue to do that. And in addition, in the Oklahoma church and state case that was just 4-4, she recused herself. They hate that, that she knew some of the attorneys. So they're mad. Trump land is mad at Kavanaugh for having raised some concerns in the birthright citizenship case. And they're very, very angry with Amy Coney Barrett. So guess what? It's a lifetime appointment. Sorry. I mean, that's just the way it goes. So now comes the big case that's before us. Oh, by the way, Kavanaugh signaled when he, excuse me, Cynthia, could you give me more of this? Kavanaugh has signaled that he's going to be one of the 4 votes to finally have a Supreme Court case beyond whether Americans have a Second Amendment right to own assault rifles that can kill 200 people in a minute. He's going to be that 4th vote, and they are going to hear such a case. But they just refuse to hear one, and he's just trying to placate the right by saying eventually there'll be that preposterous idea that the founders certainly meant for somebody to have be able to go way beyond their single shot rifles that they had in 1789 and turn their to have home ownership of basically machine guns. The big thing to watch, of course, this summer, and I'll end on this, is the birthright citizenship case has turned into a case on whether federal district court judges can issue nationwide injunctions. And the court is of two minds on it. First, the court has no patience for Trump's birthright citizenship argument. There's no chance that they're going to argue that Trump's executive order denying citizenship to people born here under the 1867 constitutional amendment is no longer law. His argument that those people are under their jurisdiction of their original countries has no merit. On the other hand, the reason why the court had their hearing in the first place is they are worried, and have been since before Trump, about the number of federal district court judges, of which there are 1,000 or so, who are enjoining the national government from doing anything anywhere in a specific case. So they don't like that. And I should distinguish between restraining orders and injunctions which can become permanent, and temporary restraining orders, which are temporary. At any rate, they don't like them. They think what the plaintiffs should be doing is filing class actions. So when Trump went to court, his attorneys went to court, they said that would be fine. The problem with class actions is it might take 6 months to assemble and certify a class. And in the meantime, you have disparate federal district court rulings on what's enjoined. So you could, and they know it, you could have, if all of a sudden you eliminated the power of district court judges to enjoin the national government with regard to Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, you could have 8 courts with jurisdiction over, 8 courts enjoin Trump within their jurisdictions, and 8 courts not. And you would have a patchwork. They're especially worried about kids born in hospitals in the United States today. You could have a patchwork of kids who are born and are citizens under a court ruling, and kids who are born either where the court hasn't ruled and the executive order still stands, or where a court has ruled the reverse, which is very unlikely. So it's not just Amy Coney Barrett that raised questions about that. It's Kavanaugh. So they're in trouble, because what they would need to do is figure out language that would have circumstances under which the federal district court judge could enjoin, or circumstances for expedited hearing, so you wouldn't have a patchwork of jurisdictions on something as critical as birthright citizenship. That's what they're trying to figure out. The possible 6 votes are the 3 liberals plus Roberts and Coney Barrett and maybe Kavanaugh, to do something short of saying you got to have a class action. If Roberts in his questioning love the class action path, which has been around for a long time. It's just what you do in the meantime. A lot of these classes are certifiable and could withstand. The other thing that happened in oral arguments is Amy Coney Barrett asked the attorney for Trump whether, if there was an appellate decision on birthright citizenship upholding a bunch of district court rulings, consolidated rulings, whether the Trump administration would honor the appellate ruling. And the attorney said he didn't know. wasn't sure. So that obviously is concerning. So it didn't give, they were heading towards space where, okay, well, just quick appeal and we'll get some satisfaction. But the Trump attorney solicitor general didn't give them that space. So that's my story on the courts. It's going to be happen this summer. It's going to be interesting. There'll be something beyond no more local injunctions. There'll be something that Coney Barrett at least joins with Roberts on, I think, to protect, to keep this patchwork situation from happening on issues of grievous national concern.
While we've been talking, the announcement has come out that Kilmar Abrego Garcia has been returned to the United States.
Wow.
And the Trump administration is saying, you know, he's a terrible man and we're going to get him back to where he goes. President Bukele of El Salvador said in a social media post, "We work with the Trump administration, and if they request a return of a gang member to face charges, of course we wouldn't refuse," which is, of course, the exact opposite of what they've been saying for a long time. So this is an interesting twist of the story where the Trump administration was bragging that they had they could act with impunity, ignore the courts. They have actually, at least the second time, maybe the third, shown that they will, on occasion, respond to the court's orders.
Well, I think, as I said before on this screen, I think ultimately 0 orders of the Supreme Court will be ignored. I think their wiggle room is definitely at the local level and maybe the appellate level. Trump the other day, with regard to Coney Barrett, said how much he respects the Supreme Court. And I think weirdly, they developed a little immunity on their own when they did the immunity ruling on Trump's criminal charges. So I've never believed that they would disobey an outright order from the Supreme Court, but there's a lot of distance between that and what they've been doing. Interestingly, in addition to the case you just cited, there's, I think, 170 Venezuelans in Texas. And remember, they're all plaintiffs. So that's where you're getting these protections. There's now one in Boston where a student is being released, and there's this kind of relief case by case. But in a lot of the cases, it's temporary relief. And if they go back, they've been trying to do these things without any meaningful due process. And if they go back with some of these accused, especially people that they can assemble some evidence on, eventually a court will let them deport. It's still a huge victory for due process. It's interesting to me, 40 years ago in my checkered past, before I worked for a Republican governor, I was director of the Civil Liberties Union in Vermont and then here in Washington State. And if you had told me that people even cared about due process as much as they did, I wouldn't have believed it. I think it's great that people get the fundamentals that you have to be clearly charged, have a chance to hear the charges against you, assemble and present evidence to an unbiased party is a sensational thing. Trump says, well, we can't have 1 million federal district court trials. And of course, that's not what due process calls for. There are all sorts of immigration hearings that satisfy the due process requirement.
It's kind of interesting. It's you know, it's from the Declaration of Independence, David.
Well, you know, that there's no constitutional
I
standing
know.
Declaration of Independence, but the Fifth and 14th Amendments are definitely handy to have right now. So it's a good thing for America. And as I said in my last blog, there's actually been more pushback from the courts with regard to the firings and the rescissions, the budget cuts but the lead is definitely with due process and deportation. Remember, this is different than, as we'll find in a disheartening way, from temporary protective status, which Biden did under immigration law, and which allows you to say that Haitians or Venezuelans or Afghans have a special immigration status to protect them from the regimes back home. And Trump has more power to declare and remove that status than he does on these individual deportation cases. So that's a presidential power. I don't think a court's going to rule. I mean, they might rule that he didn't follow a procedure, but I think it's going to be hard to. I mean, some of that is amazing. You're sending Afghan. I used to have 30 Afghan students. I just weep that they would lose TPS because they would not do well back home. They believed in democracy. Other questions, thoughts? We're almost at our hour. Yes, Charles.
So one thing I've relied on for quite a few years is a show called Democracy Now! By Amy Goodman, who's the granddaughter of a Jewish rabbi, and I have found her newscast to be extremely honest and enlightening. Are you familiar with her reporting and her journalism?
I'm not. I'll look it up. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
1 hour a day, 6 days a week, 25 years.
You want to repeat the reference again?
Yes. Well, it's the show is called Democracy Now! And her name is Amy Goodman, AMYGOODMAN. And she's I think that she's kind of one of the independent journalists. She doesn't take any corporate money. And it seems to me like a lot of our newscasts these days seem very corporate driven in their objectives.
Speaking of which, CBS 60 Minutes is falling apart over corporate.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
She's on KBCS at from 8 to 9 in the morning.
That's great. That's great. And you could also get her. You could also get her on her own website and also a YouTube. She's on YouTube daily. It's pretty easy to get her. But we got her to come to be in our local town in Michigan many years ago. She helped us get her information there. And so I've watched her a long time. I think she's worth listening to.
That's great. It's really heartening, the kind of voices that have emerged, and not just the big deals like Reich and bless her soul, Heather Cox Richardson, but you can find good stuff all over the place that's helping us.
Good.
The better informed we are, the better we're going to do.
I think so, yeah.
Final comments from anyone? Reed's going to change the date, so we're not on the 4th. So we're going to be on
the 11th. We'll be meeting Friday, July 11th, so that we can celebrate our country's founding.
Check Andy Bashir. You got an upcoming presidential candidate who's won twice in a red state, Kentucky, and who has both won in a red state and walked the picket line with UAW. So check who he is. Kamala considered him as a vice presidential candidate, and I think he's going to run for sure.
And David mentioned a couple times that he writes a blog. It's at ourunfinishedwork.blogspot.com. So you can follow David there.
Thank you for that. Yeah, great.
Ourunfinishedwork.blogspot.com. Thank you, David, once again for spending the hour with us. Thank you, everybody who showed up. Yes, who showed up to participate and raise your questions and comments.